changing us as people. And I mentioned that on my personal page, I was going to have kind of a discussion. You're welcome to chat if you have comments or thoughts. Go ahead and you're welcome to throw those in. But I wanted us to be able to talk about the biblical concepts, the biblical principles of justice and mercy, and what those are and how they apply to what we're seeing happen in the United States today. I didn't feel right about not talking about those things. The reason why we didn't really focus on that this morning is that I work with elders at a local congregation. We have a year-long plan for things that will be taught, and I don't feel like I have. I don't want to veto the plan without getting to talk to them, right? So I'm not just going to kind of do that without a discussion. So we are going to talk about it now, and I have Tim Matheny with me, whom I respect very much. He's a very good Bible student and a great guy, a good man, and so I'm glad to be able to discuss these things with him. So what was going on yesterday in Nashville? What happened?
Well, I kind of followed it last night. I was a little ways away from town, and thankfully so. Yeah. So what started as a peaceful demonstration was apparently co-opted into something that was no longer peaceful, and it doesn't. It looks like there wasn't loss of life, but there was certainly significant damage to property and things burned and things broken and a lot of anger. And finally, the mayor got the governor to call out the National Guard, and order seemed to have been restored by about 11 last night. So it was a mess. It started out as something that had been planned as a peaceful protest, and something that's well within the rights in this country. But it didn't turn out that way, unfortunately, and that has been similar to what we've seen across the nation.
Yeah, and I'd like to repeat what you said. There was a peaceful protest that started yesterday, and if I remember the timeline right, that ended at like 5. I think that was their plan, and everything else happened after that. And the people who organized that protest disavowed everything that happened afterward. That wasn't part of their protest. That's not what they were doing. And the mayor of Nashville, was at the protest. And I don't remember an exact quote, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he said something along the lines very close to, this is a good thing, and it's something that needs to happen. And I think he's right. And that's why we're here talking about this afternoon. And it's not a political thing. I mean, when the mayor is there talking, I mean, it might make it seem like it's political, but we're not talking politics this afternoon. We're talking biblical principles and who we ought to be as the people of God, and what it means for us to be people who seek after justice and mercy. It's not political for me. I'm not doing it because I'm a Republican or a Democrat or libertarian or whatever else. It has nothing to do with politics as far as I'm concerned, but it does have to do with morality and biblical principles. And where those things intersect politics, I can't help that. But where those things exist, we should talk, right? We should put our voice into that conversation. Because I think that's what Jesus says. So, any other comments before we?
Yeah, as human beings who try to follow God, but really all human beings have this: is we have an innate sense of what is just and unjust, and it is tuned in different ways with different experiences and things around us for different people. But it seems that we all have some sort of sense of what is just and unjust. And if, for instance, you referenced earlier today the conversation between David and Nathan, there is a sense in which we sometimes may violate that sense of justice. But people who don't ever listen to an innate sense of justice, we kind of have a name for those. We call those people sociopaths,
Yes.
because there's no such thing as a reasonable response to injustice that doesn't it shouldn't have reference to us to a God who is just. And if we are using that as our sort of starting point, then for us a feeling against injustice is natural. Now, again, exactly how those lines are drawn and the experiences that from which we view different aspects of our society, because none of us have an overarching view of everything. That's God's job. um, we may see them different ways, but to act as though there's no need for justice, including justice that sometimes is not being delivered by government or by some sort of policing officials, that should it there is a natural way in which our sense of justice is offended, and to act as if
Yes.
others do not have the right to have their sense of justice offended is quite simply foolish.
Yeah, I like the way that you worded that. That there's that innate sense of justice, and I think because we're all made in God's image, and it is the fact that we are made in God's image which causes us to seek that, and the fact that all people are made in God's image should be one of the driving points of us seeking justice for other people. Um, and the difficulty with me personally, and that's another reason why we're doing this now is because a lot of this is personal. The principles aren't, but like me personally, there are experiences that I don't have, that I haven't had, and that I may never have, just because of the way our culture and our country works. Uh, I mean, and I can't create those things artificially. And so what I have to do when I find myself in a situation and my gut reaction would be, oh well, that's not right. But there's all these people saying this is our experience. The principles of justice and mercy then I think require me to sit back and listen and say, okay, tell me what your experiences are, because those aren't mine. And if those are your experiences, that's not right. And we've got to fix it. And so sometimes this starts with just listening. And I think that's what the peaceful part of that protest yesterday really was about, is just giving some people a chance to talk, giving them a voice. And I think it's good to listen. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh no, absolutely. And um, the unfortunate aspect of this for some people is like you say, just an inability to see that other people's experience is different from yours, and that's where we all. But I mean, not to be too harsh, but every single person has their own set of experiences. So we have to be at least mindful of that. But at the same time, there are, biblical principles of love, justice, of kindness and mercy. And for us not to be angered at injustice, or to act as though it is wrong to be angered at injustice, simply doesn't speak to the human condition.
Yes. And that's what I want to focus on, is those biblical principles. Because when we see injustice, I like what you said, it should make us mad, right? It should make us angry. And so the protests now are because of what happened to a man named George Floyd. Um, and there are many things that have happened. This is what that protest specifically was about. Those events in Minneapolis. And when you hear that happens to somebody, it should make you upset, right? I mean that's a normal reaction, is to be upset. And then when you hear that somebody's experiences are that that's kind of a normal thing, that should make you even more upset, right? It shouldn't be that way. And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, is that's in my life, that is a foreign experience to me. But it's not for some people. And well, we're trying to walk a very balanced approach here, in just dealing with the biblical principles and then seeing how they apply, and not delving off into politics or blaming people for things. And so we have to, it's hard. So I thought we would look, just to get started, at one of my favorite passages. It's over in Genesis. And it's when God is talking about Abraham and why he chose Abraham. And just kind of thinking of him as the father of the faithful. You know, he says, I have chosen him that he may command. This is Genesis chapter 18 and verse 19. I've chosen him that he may command his children and keep his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised. And so it's interesting to me that the way of the Lord is doing two things: doing what is right, doing righteousness, and doing justice. And that's why he chose Abraham, because Abraham was going to train his children to do justice. Any thoughts about that before we?
Well, and the thrust of the Old Testament is it seems to cycle back to this, that God's people began to pull away from this time and again, and as they began to pull away from this, it was incredibly destructive. Where you get to the period of the judges, and near the end we get this horrific picture that just says every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's not justice. That's the opposite of justice. And then you go on further down in the prophets, and you get this same picture. And Micah just has to say, he's shown you what's good. What does he require of you? Do justice, or love mercy, do justice. The other way around. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Again, the principle seems to always be there. It starts with Abraham, and it just keeps going on and keeps going on. And here we are today, and we still face, in the human condition, we still face the same questions as before. Why, how is it that we, in a world that is, difficult for any human being to navigate, how is it that we encourage the doing of justice and the loving of mercy in our society and in whatever bubble of influence that we have?
Right. And I think that's the struggle, right? You mentioned earlier that when we see injustice, it should make us angry. And I mean, it should, right? That is seeing a human being made in the image of God treated in a way that isn't right should make you mad. And if it doesn't make you mad, then we have to go and we have to fix that. I mean, that there's not an excuse for that. It should make you upset. And we see another passage, just to add what you're saying. You think about the law, the direction that God is giving to these people. In Deuteronomy 16 and 20, he says, justice and only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that your Lord God is giving you. God is calling on these people to be people of justice. This way of, not giving favor to the wealthy, or not discriminating against the poor, not treating the sojourner badly. Masters in the ancient world, masters treating their slaves fairly. Just this entire concept of this is how somebody ought to be treated. And when you look at the way the Hebrew people, just this sense of justice that is built into the law, the women in the ancient world should have been treated better under the law of Moses than anything else. people who were servants, right? There's a wide variety of servants that existed in the ancient world. They should have been treated better under the law of Moses than anything else. It's not always the case, but the God who created them gave them this direction for treating people right, regardless of who they were. And where that fails, that's a human failure, not a divine one. And when we see injustice in our world today, that's a human failure, not a divine one. I'm about to jump over to Matthew 23, unless there was anything else that you had to add before that. Okay. So when we start talking about these things, just to be totally honest, there are times in the past where when somebody would bring up this discussion, my thoughts would be, well, I don't treat people badly, and I have never been treated that way, so it must not be that big of a deal. And that's why I think we need to listen to people, because not every people have different experiences than me. It's a mistake to think that I can take my life and judge everybody else based on my experiences. And when we get to Matthew 23, it's going to talk about that. It touches on that idea, and it touches on that idea with, I think, the excuse that I would often make for myself in the past. So I didn't do that. Something bad happened, but I didn't do it. And since I didn't do it, it's kind of out of my hands. And in Matthew 23, Jesus is really, he's having a unpleasant discussion with the Pharisees. I mean, he's upbraiding these people. And one of the things he says in Matthew 23 is, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness, and those you ought to have done without neglecting the other things." I can picture Pharisees when Jesus would talk about justice, like treat a widow who needs help, and the Pharisee going, "Well, I didn't do that. That I didn't make her a widow. I'm not the one who hurt her. I didn't take her house away. I'm not the reason why she doesn't have food. It's not my fault." And I can see Jesus speaking to that kind of mindset here. Yes, you didn't do anything wrong, but you're not doing anything right either in this situation as far as mercy and justice are concerned. And so in the past, the temptation has been, my hands weren't dirty, so I don't need to react. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that I can say that. Now, I can't fix every injustice in the world. And I think you hinted at that earlier with the idea of the sphere of influence. But I cannot sit back and say, well, I didn't do that, so I don't have to react. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. The principle of just the generalized principle of humility before God seems to demand that we would try to act in a godly fashion towards, and God hates injustice. He said that. I hate. There are things that he hates. He hates injustice. And if I'm going to act like God, I'm going to hate injustice. Not a person, but I'm going to hate the implementation of that, whoever it is, wherever it is. And, there's injustice that is committed on all sorts of ways, and their disproportionate reaction also turns out to be unjust at times. And certainly, there has been that as well over the last little bit. And we don't ignore that that's the case as well. But the fact of the matter is that for us to just act like that we're remote to this, or that somehow it isn't applicable if you're not right there, and if you're not in that particular setting, is problematic. And I don't know how to, I'll say it this way: I'm not there, or I'm not here to judge a person or a person's heart. In fact, I'm sort of in an opposite position. I know one thing. I know that there is a unifying factor between George Floyd, between those who did injustice to him, if that is what happened, and we have, evidence that seems to indicate that. And anyone else who has been involved in any way, I know one thing. I know that Jesus wants everyone to be saved. I know that he wanted every one of them to come to him. I don't care how vile their actions have been in the past. I don't care how unjust that they have been. And I need to understand that my response, it cannot be, as a Christian, cannot be anything other than Jesus' response. Jesus wants me to love them for a purpose, not just to show kindness, but he wants me to love them for his purpose, which is to get them to come to him. If I allow injustice or allow myself to show an indifference, then I'm not only am I treating the concept of justice with and less than what it deserves. I'm also getting out of the theoretical range. I'm also putting a block and a barrier between myself and the ability to have influence on people to come to God, because I show that in some way I don't care the same way that God cares about their eternity.
Yes. I think you hit the nail on the head on why this is so important, right? That's why. Because when these things happen in life, there's a very real sense in which I can't fix it, right? Even if I was somebody in a position of power and authority, and I could, prosecute the wrongdoer, I still can't fix it. But that doesn't mean that I can't show justice and mercy. It doesn't mean that I can't show love and kindness. Ultimately, the only person who can fix things is God, and he will. And I love what you said, that the purpose behind being people of justice, people of mercy, is we're showing the world what will happen now. We should be pictures, we should be image bearers of God, showing the world this is what God's sense of mercy looks like. This is what God's sense of justice looks like. It's bigger than the American political system. It's bigger than a political party. It's bigger than anything. And so when we think about our role in this, it's to show that bigger picture. It's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. It's not a United States or any other country thing. It's a God thing. And if I'm not willing to stand up for justice wherever it is, and the difficult thing is that it's going to make you enemies all over the place, right? It's because it's not a right or a left, a red or a blue thing. There will be times where you stand up against a predominantly Republican idea, or other times a predominantly Democratic idea. It doesn't matter. If it's not just, then we shouldn't be okay with it. And the purpose, I really like what you said. The purpose is to show people Christ. And that's why he had enemies all over the place. He wasn't playing politics. And for me, maybe that's one of the most difficult things. When I try and talk about these things, it's almost like we don't know how to react to them without bringing politics into it. We've been trained, and to try and react in an apolitical way is difficult. And I struggle with that. And the only thing that I know to do is, no matter the situation, to give the voiceless a voice, to give the weak strength, and to do whatever I can to help those who are hurting, regardless. If you have any other insights that we can offer.
Well, just that we have this tendency I have this tendency. I don't know. We do. I think we do, because I think it's very common to take big ideas like this and bring them to some sort of an abstraction.
Mhm.
It's it's a some kind of an idea. Government should do X. Policy should be Y. That there are things that are big ideas and concepts that don't translate to my action or don't need to translate to my action. Somebody should do something about this. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, the somebody that has to do something about this, the only thing I can do is show love
Mhm.
in my place, to show concern, to show everything that God is concerned about, to try to mirror what God is concerned about in the way that I talk to people, treat people. So much as to say, look, I don't need to hold forth on the political ramifications of what has happened over the last few days. I don't need that. It's fun in the sense that maybe I somehow think I'm really smart, and that I have a better solution than somebody down the road. But the fact of the matter is, what I really need to do is to show people that I love them like God loves them. And that requires, and it just has always intrigued me, in the words of Micah, how does the connection all come together, of doing justice, loving mercy, and walking in humility with God? That connection, to me, it's like I'm usually good, about every 5 minutes at doing one of the three,
Mhm.
and connecting those together seems to me to be the way that we will approach this in such a way that we can unite instead of alienate.
Yeah. And it's almost like when things like this happen, that idea of being united. Uh, there was a protest in Nashville, many places yesterday, but in Nashville, because people felt disconnected. Right? They feel like they're being separated. Regardless of whether you think that's a reality or not, they feel that way. They see patterns. Their experiences lead them to believe uh, that things are a certain way and they shouldn't be that way. You can even stretch that out and say that the riot that happened afterward, it's wrong. There is no excuse for it. It's morally wrong. Uh, I can't remember the exact quote. I'll look it up in just a second. But I think Dr. King said something like Martin Luther King Jr. said something very close to the idea that a riot or violence is for those who feel like their voice has not been heard. And so you see those two groups, they're reacting in very different ways, but it seems like the root cause is probably the same. There is this feeling that something isn't right. And the government hasn't uh, or won't, in their view, fix it. Right? And many people feel that way across all spectrums, that the government either can't or won't fix it. That's why, like you said earlier, I think that we have to focus on that big picture. On we have a God who is justice. We have a Savior who is merciful. And that's what's missing: justice and mercy, those weightier matters of the law. And we have what everybody wants. We have justice, we have mercy with God, and we show people that in the way that we should talk to them, the things we should do to them, the way that we involve our life with theirs. Uh, it seems like that you talked about bringing those things together from Micah. It seems like maybe one of the ways that we do that is by actually involving ourselves in the lives of, again, the people in our sphere of influence. I don't think that God expects you to fly all over the world to right all the wrongs, but in your sphere of influence, draw near to the people who are ostracized, or the people who are downtrodden. Draw near to the people who don't have a political voice. Make friends with those people. And then the words of Jesus, where he would say things like, don't give gifts to somebody who can repay you back. Right now, those things maybe start to resonate a little more, and they start to make more sense, because that is being just and merciful. Not being kind to people who don't need your kindness, but being kind to people who need it so badly they can't pay it back. And the practical, again, I like what you said. That's theory. The practical ways of doing that are where it gets difficult. And I don't know how to find practical answers to these things of justice and mercy without listening first. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, and even once I have listened, I may not have the capability to do those things. And sometimes, I did appreciate what you said, that, in many ways, it is a sense in which people do not feel that people are hearing them. People who don't look the same, people who don't live in the same place, whatever, that simply there is this raw sense that because we do not experience the same things, that somehow we are not able to hear what other people are saying. And there is a very real danger that is the case. And one of the biggest things that we can do as children of God is to be those people who listen, and who, if nothing else, can say, I know a God who, may not fix everything that you see as wrong right now. Mm-hmm. But I do know that he will. And what's more, I know that he loves and enfolds. And the reason I know that is because it's happened to me, that he enfolds people in his love. And because of that, I'm in some cases, silver and gold I don't have, like Peter and John said, but in some ways, I have a great deal to give somebody, in the sense that I can tell them about a God and a Christ who love them.
And maybe this is where, thinking on a local level, people who are in a local church, this is where then you have the opportunity to make that difference where you are. Is sometimes justice and mercy are just bringing people in, right? Showing them, like you said, I like that, enfolding them in love, bringing them in, accepting them, being willing to make them part of your family. It was in our Bible class this morning. One of the people in the Bible class made a comment about what forgiveness looks like. And the comment was that if somebody, stole him or did him wrong in a business deal, it's one thing to say, well, I forgive you, I'm not going to prosecute you or press charges. It's another thing to say, I forgive you, now why don't you come stay at my house and be part of my family? And that is what God offers me, right? As an individual, I sin against him, I become his enemy, and God not only forgives me, he says, I want you to be my son too. Come into my house and be part of my family. That's justice. I mean, that's what I needed. That's mercy. That is the weightier matter of the law. And I can do that. Right? I can't fix societal wrongs. I can't fix politics. I can't fix laws. I can't do those things. But I can make somebody part of my family. I can bring them in and include them and see them for what they are, which is a human being with human dignity, made in the image of God. I can do that. And maybe that's where it starts, maybe, is this willingness to bring people in. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it seems to me that, you asked the question, where does unity, what can you do to promote unity? Well, first of all, you have to find a platform upon which we are unified. We can be unified. There are a lot of those things. I mean, certainly in our country in the last few months, we've seen all kinds of ways in which we have very different places, needs, everything else. And one area, what if there's anything that we've seen, one area of this country in many ways is very different from other areas. That is going to be true because that is the nature of this planet.
Mm-hmm.
That said, every person has a unifying need for love. We have a unifying need to love, to be loved, and to have the relationship, to the ultimate love that God brings. That is something that you and I can offer. And we can, how that needs to be applied, will be different depending on who we're talking to and how that's happening. And, that's where, wisdom comes in. But the truth of the matter is that, the very fact of showing love instead of an abstract philosophy already puts us really in a different spot from where so often people, all of us get. Mankind's issues come in, difficulties of issues come when we abstract one another, when we remove each other's unique need, or I should say shared need, with unique qualities. Maybe that's some way to say it, that we all have unique qualities, but we all have a shared need. We all need God. We all need love. And those are things that I can attempt to replicate God's love for the people that I see. And if I'm not willing to, or if I think that, somehow that, that people should just, bear with it or whatever, it's not really that bad. What I'm doing, I fear is so easy to do is to abstract to a philosophy about a person instead of seeing the person.
Yeah. And that's, and maybe we'll end it here with that. I think that's the most practical thing we can do, is to love people. And I like what you said. You're going to have to love every person differently. We don't all have the same experiences. We don't have the same background. We don't have the same cultures. We have to love people how they perceive love. And so I guess maybe there's two places where we'll look real quick in the scriptures. The first will be John 13, where you have Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And that's love, right? A love of service in a very practical way. Here was something that he could do to show his disciples how much he cared for them, what he was willing to do for them. And so he became their servant, and he washed their feet. To the point where even one of the disciples, Peter, would object, and he would say, "You can't do that." And Jesus' response was, "I have to do this." And then he'll finish that up by saying in verse 34, "A new commandment I give you." So it's John chapter 13, verse 34. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. And by this, all people will know that you are my disciples." I mean, that's it. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, isn't it? This idea that if we want people to know who Christ is, if we want people to know that we follow him, this is how. This love. And this that doesn't allow me to sit on the sidelines and say, well, this isn't a big deal. Because if it is a big deal to you, then it should be a big deal to me too. If I love you. And so those times in life where I find myself thinking, oh, well, this isn't that big of a deal, are those I think are times in my life where I find myself not being very good at loving other people. And I have to fix that. What do you think?
No, I couldn't agree more. And it is like I say, I have to work at making these things real in an individual face-to-face sense with people. And whatever you do in your life, if you are in the public sphere in any way, if you're out and about, you have it is one of the easiest things in the world to see the people in front of you as, it's not things, but to see them as something other than you.
Yes.
And our goal has to be to come back and say, no, that person is like me in the most fundamental, most important way. I don't care where they're from. I don't care who they are in terms of their interactions with the rest of society. I know this. They need to know that God loves them. They need to hear it. They need to see it in me. And they need then to understand what it means to get into a relationship with Him. And if I do things to get in the way, including ignore the fact that they have those same needs that I have, then I have become an impediment.
Yeah. It was in college. I took an African American literature class, and I was introduced to a wide variety of writers and poets that I didn't even know was out there. And one of the poets, his name is Timon West, and he wrote a poem called Other. And it was the first time, so I'm like 20 years old, almost maybe 21, and it's the first time that the concept of other was really brought up in a way that I got it. Or at least I began to understand what this was. This idea where you have an other, like you said. When I start making categories and I say, well, they're a different kind of person than me, then what I'm doing is I'm really saying, well, they're not really human. You know, they're only so much human. And over the past few days, I've heard a lot of people reference the 3/5 compromise. And another kind of poet, maybe prophet, a poet, a songwriter. His name is Sho Baraka, and you should look him up on Amazon Music and listen to his music. Sho Baraka, Shobaraka. He has a song where he talks about that, and in the song, one of the lines says that he is only counted as 3/5 of a man, and it's that other concept. Until we look out, and yeah, there are differences, right? I'm not talking about erasing differences, but those differences are actually what makes humanity, right? The picture of the body with all the different parts in the New Testament, those differences make humanity. But when I start using those differences to create an other, then I'm doing that. I'm doing that very thing. I'm seeing them as less than fully human. And that's not love. And I think that'll get us maybe to the last Bible verse, and unless you've got others you want to throw in, which feel free. It's over in Matthew 7, where Jesus, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for that is the law and the prophets. And it took me a long time to figure, and maybe I haven't figured it out yet, but it took me a long time, I think, to figure out what he was saying, where I used to think, oh, well, I like ice cream, so I should just give everybody ice cream. Or I like this, so I'll give everybody that. I don't think that's what he means. I have to know what they want and then do what they want. Because really, when I think about me, I want people to do to me what I want done to me. And you want people to do what you want done to you. And so I have to know what they want and treat them that way. And I think fundamentally, the first thing that I think everybody would desire is to be treated like a human being. And to be shown love. Again, I like what you said earlier, that the expression of that love changes depending on the situation and who you're talking to and all sorts of circumstances. But the root, love still has to be present. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it strikes me that, and I just following history, the most horrific moments of human history come about because someone decides to declare that other human beings are not human beings or less than human beings. And I don't care where it is, right up to the modern times. It seems that the way that mankind justifies atrocity is, on huge scale, is to say that some subgroup of humanity isn't really human. And it is true in bulk. What's hard sometimes for me to recognize, and I think generally for all of us to recognize, is that we are capable of doing that on a one-to-one level, and that we are also capable on a one-to-one level of spending the time conversely, of spending the time that makes someone recognize that we believe that they are 100% human and as deserving, and that we know that they're as deserving of our love and God's love as anyone else, as we are. And of course, the real test of this is when we come to the point that we really honestly care more about them knowing that than we do about our own convenience, our own time, our own, all the things that we, tend to say aren't precious to us, but we really then turn around and act as though they are, more so than the time and effort that it takes to listen and to give care.
Yeah. We'll go ahead. We'll leave that there. I mean, that I think is the foundation, and if anything else, that's the starting point to have the further discussion. Is that love and the recognition of a common humanity, with everyone made fully in the image of God, and that's where it starts. And being willing to love people. So we'll go ahead and stop there, and we may do this again. I would love to get to do this again with you. I really appreciate you joining me. It was better because you were here. I appreciate you. You're a very good man, very insightful, very wise, and I love you, brother. Thank you.
Love you. Yeah.
We
love everybody who's watching.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. We hope it's a blessing to you. This is a conversation that needs to continue. And it starts here with love, which is the root and the foundation of the gospel. God so loved the world, and that love should be reflected in us. God bless y'all, and we'll see y'all soon.